Notary cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said the words I never expected to hear at my grandmother's will reading. And to my granddaughter Maya, I leave the full title of the Ashford property, the house, the land, and everything within it. The room went still. My brother's chair scraped back, just slightly. Just enough. I looked at him across the table. His face had gone the color of old paper. And 30 minutes later, when the detective walked through the front door of that conference room, I finally understood why. My name is Maya Collier. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last decade building a life in Portland, Oregon, where the rain comes sideways and the coffee is always too strong, and I've learned to love both. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job where you spend your days making sure things don't fall apart, which, looking back, feels like the cruelest kind of irony. Growing up, my grandmother's house in Sycamore Falls, Tennessee, was the only place I ever felt completely safe. It was a pale yellow Victorian on a corner lot with a wraparound porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard, so old it had split and grown back into itself 3 times. My grandmother, Ruth, called it stubborn wood, said it reminded her of our family. I used to think that was a compliment. My brother Nathan is 4 years older than me. He's always been the kind of man who fills a room. Loud laugh, easy smile, the sort of person strangers trust immediately. He married his college girlfriend, Diane, and they settled in Nashville, close enough to visit Grandma Ruth, but far enough to only show up when it was convenient. Still, he was her favorite. He never let me forget it. When Grandma Ruth passed in September, she left behind 3 things that mattered: the Ashford house, a modest investment account, and a handwritten letter that her attorney, Mr. Caldwell, had been holding in a sealed envelope for 11 years. The will reading was scheduled for a Tuesday in October at Mr. Caldwell's office in Sycamore Falls. I flew in the night before, checked into a motel on Route 9, and barely slept. My father had passed years ago. My mother had moved to Phoenix and sent her regrets. It would be just Nathan, Diane, and me, and Mrs. Opal Briggs. Opal was Grandma Ruth's next-door neighbor of 40 years, named as a secondary witness in the estate proceedings. She was 81, wore her white hair pinned under a wide-brimmed hat regardless of the weather, and had opinions about everything. I had always loved her. Nathan had always found her inconvenient. The night before the reading, I drove past the Ashford house out of habit. I hadn't been back since the funeral. The magnolia tree was still there, still split down the middle, still standing. The porch light was on. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Grandma Ruth had been gone 6 weeks. Nobody should have been running that porch light. I slowed the car, rolled down the window. The house looked the same, but something was different. A sticker on the front door. Small. Rectangular. I couldn't read it from the road, but it caught the headlights like plastic. I almost stopped, but it was late, and I told myself I was tired, and I drove back to the motel and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off at 7. Mr. Caldwell's office smelled like cedar and printer toner, the kind of place where time moves slower on purpose. Nathan and Diane were already there when I arrived, sitting side by side in matching charcoal coats, Nathan's hand resting over Diane's the way people hold hands when they want everyone to notice. He hugged me at the door, warm, practiced. "Long flight?" he asked. "Short enough," I said. Opal arrived 4 minutes later, hat and all, and sat directly across from Nathan without saying a word to him. He smiled at her anyway. She did not smile back. Mr. Terr. Caldwell entered at 9 exactly, set a thick folder on the table, and spent the first 15 minutes reviewing routine documents. The investment account, split evenly between Nathan and me, straightforward, no surprises. Nathan nodded along the way someone does when they already know the answer. Then Mr. Caldwell picked up the second document. Regarding the Ashford property, he said, "Your grandmother was very specific." He unfolded the pages, smoothed them with his palm, and read, "I leave the full title of the Ashford property, the house, the land, and everything within it, to my granddaughter, Maya Collier, with the condition that it never be sold outside the family for a period of no less than 20 years. I felt the words land somewhere behind my sternum. The house. She left me the house. Across the table, something happened to Nathan's face. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't surprise. It was something harder than both, something that looked like calculation failing in real time. His jaw set. He folded his hands on the table. "That can't be right," he said quietly. Mr. Caldwell looked up over his glasses. "I assure you, Mr. Collier, the document is— I've already spoken to someone about the property," Nathan said, voice still measured, still controlled. "There may be a prior instrument you're not aware of." The room shifted. Opal put her purse down slowly on the table, like she was setting a chess piece. Mr. Caldwell's expression didn't change. He was, I realized, already prepared for this. He reached into the folder and withdrew a second document, this one on different paper, and slid it toward the center of the table. "Is this the instrument you're referring to?" Nathan looked at it. Then his face went the color of old paper. "That's a deed of sale, Mr. Jollett," Caldwell said evenly. "Notarized 6 weeks ago, bearing what appears to be Ruth Collier's signature, transferring ownership of the Ashford property to a third party for consideration of $450,000. He paused. "I've already been in contact with the county recorder's office and a forensic document examiner. Ruth Collier was under hospice care at home during the week this document was allegedly signed. She was on medication that would have made her legally incapable of executing a contract. And the notary whose stamp appears on this document," he said, looking at Nathan directly, "retired in 2019. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Diane's hand slipped out from under Nathan's. "I want to understand," I said, because I needed to hear myself say it out loud before I believed it. "You tried to sell Grandma's house while she was dying." Nathan looked at me. For just a second, the easy smile was completely gone, and what was underneath it was something I didn't recognize. Then it came back, thinner this time, stretched over something sharp. "It's more complicated than that, Maya." "Then explain it simply," I said. "Because I'm an engineer, I like things to be structurally sound." He started to speak, stopped, looked at Mr. Bay Caldwell, who was watching him with the patience of a man who had seen this before and was not impressed. Looked at Opal, who had not moved and had not looked away from him since the document appeared on the table. "I was protecting the asset," he said finally. "The house needs work. The market is good right now. I thought you'd sell it before anyone found out it wasn't yours to sell," Opal said. Her voice was perfectly level. She reached into her purse and produced a thin manila envelope, which she placed on the table and pushed toward Mr. Tyne. Caldwell, without looking away from Nathan. "I took photos of the realtor's lockbox on the front door the day they put it there. I have documentation of 2 showings that took place while Ruth was still alive. I also have a voicemail from Nathan, left on my phone by mistake 3 weeks ago, in which he discusses closing timelines with someone he calls his guy." Nathan stared at her. "She was my friend for 40 years, Opal said. Did you think I wouldn't be paying attention?" That was the moment I understood that Opal Briggs had not come to this meeting as a formality. She had come as a witness, the kind you can't discredit. Nathan pushed his chair back from the table. "I'd like to speak with my own attorney before this goes any further." "Of course," Mr. Caldwell said. He was already picking up the phone on his desk. "I've taken the liberty of contacting the county sheriff's office. A detective should be arriving shortly to take preliminary statements regarding the fraudulent deed. You're welcome to reach your attorney in the meantime." The knock at the conference room door came 11 minutes later. I know because I watched the clock on the wall and counted every second between Nathan's last coherent sentence and the moment the door opened. A woman in a navy blazer stepped inside, introduced herself as Detective Reyes, Property Crimes Division, and asked if everyone was present and willing to give a statement. Nathan had not moved from his chair. Diane had not said a single word since Opal placed the envelope on the table. She was looking at her husband the way you look at a piece of architecture you thought was solid and have just been told was never properly built. I gave my statement first, in a side office that smelled like old paper and something faintly floral. Detective Reyes listened without interrupting. She had the kind of stillness that made you want to be precise, and I was. I told her everything I knew, which wasn't much. The porch light, the sticker on the door, the feeling in my stomach at the will reading when Nathan said the words there, maybe a prior instrument. "Did you know about the sale attempt before today?" she asked. "No," I said. "I found out the same time everyone else did." "And your relationship with your brother, would you describe it as close?" I thought about that for a moment. About Sunday dinners I wasn't invited to. About the funeral, where Nathan stood front and center for every photograph, and I stood slightly to the left, slightly out of frame. About the birthday cards from Grandma Ruth that always arrived early for him and sometimes arrived late for me, and how I'd spent years deciding it didn't mean anything. "We're family," I said. "That's not the same thing as close." She nodded once and wrote something down. When I came back into the main conference room, Nathan and Diane were still there. They had not left. I don't know if that was their choice or the detective's quiet suggestion. Nathan was on his phone. Diane was looking out the window at the parking lot. Neither of them looked at me. Opal was sitting exactly where I'd left her, hat still on, hands folded in her lap. She looked up when I came in and patted the chair beside her. "Your grandmother knew," she said when I sat down. Not loud, not for Nathan's benefit, just for mine. "Knew what?" "That he would try something." She smoothed the brim of her hat with one finger. "She rewrote that will 8 months ago, updated her attorney's instructions, made sure the sealed letter went to me as a backup copy." She said. Opal paused like she was deciding how much of this was hers to give me. She said Nathan had her financial power of attorney, and she was starting to worry he understood that as permission rather than responsibility. I sat with that for a long moment. The weight of it, that my grandmother had spent some portion of her final months quietly building a wall between what she wanted and what her favorite grandchild might do with it. That she had done it carefully and legally and without ever saying a word to me about it, because she didn't want me carrying that worry. She had trusted me to be okay, and she had made sure I would be. She loved him, Opal said, like she could read the question I wasn't asking. That was never the problem. She just loved you more honestly. Detective Reyes came back into the room 40 minutes later and informed Nathan that he was being asked to accompany her to the station for a formal recorded statement regarding the fraudulent deed and the unauthorized use of the financial power of attorney. She was calm about it. Professional, the kind of calm that leaves no room for argument. Nathan looked at me before he stood up. I'd been waiting for it, that look. The one that would ask me to say something, to intervene, to be the sister who smoothed things over because that was always my function in this family. The one who stayed quiet and kept the peace and made herself small enough that no one had to reckon with how much space she'd been pushed out of. I looked back at him and said nothing, not because I was cold, not because I'd stopped caring, but because I had finally, at 32 years old, understood that silence can be the most honest thing in a room full of people saying the wrong words. Diane followed him out. She paused at the door, and I thought for a moment she might say something to me. She didn't. The door closed behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Mr. Caldwell stayed behind to finalize paperwork. Opal and I sat in the conference room while the afternoon light moved slowly across the table, and she told me about the last few months of Grandma Ruth's life. The good days, the difficult ones. The afternoon Ruth asked her to come sit on the porch and they watched the magnolia tree for an hour without talking. She said that tree was her favorite thing she ever grew, Opal told me, and she didn't even plant it. It was already there when she moved in. She just didn't cut it down when everyone told her to. I drove to the Ashford house that evening alone. The lockbox was gone from the front door. The realtor's sticker had been removed, leaving a faint rectangle of less faded paint, like a ghost. I unlocked the door with the key Mr. Pant. Caldwell had given me Grandma Ruth's key, the same one that had hung on a painted ceramic hook in her kitchen for as long as I could remember, and stepped inside. The house smelled like cedar and lavender and something underneath, both that I couldn't name but recognized immediately. The smell of a place that knows you. I walked through every room slowly, the kitchen with its yellow curtains, the reading chair by the window where Ruth had solved 1,000 crossword puzzles, the upstairs hallway where the third floorboard from the top always creaked, and she'd never fixed it because she said she liked knowing where people were. In her bedroom, on the nightstand, there was a photograph I'd never seen before. Me maybe 7 years old, asleep on the porch swing, a book open on my chest. I didn't know she'd taken it. I didn't know she'd kept it right there, beside her bed, for what must have been 25 years. I sat down on the edge of her bed and held the photograph for a long time. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Nathan was charged with elder financial abuse, deed fraud, and misuse of power of attorney. The third party he'd sold the house to, a developer out of Nashville who, it turned out, had known the deed was irregular, faced separate civil action. The sale was voided. The title reverted cleanly to me under the original will. Diane filed for divorce in February. I didn't find out from Nathan. I found out from a mutual cousin who mentioned it in passing at Thanksgiving, the way people mention things they assume you already know. Nathan called me once, in March. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd been under financial pressure I didn't know about, that the house had felt like a solution, that he hadn't thought it all the way through. He said he hoped someday I could understand. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Not because I needed more from it, but because I wanted to be fair to it. I wanted to make sure I heard everything he actually said and didn't add anything he didn't. He never said he thought about what it would take away from me. He said he was under pressure. He said he hadn't thought it through. Those are not the same as knowing what you were doing and doing it anyway. And they're also not as far from it as he seemed to believe. I didn't call back, but I also didn't delete the voicemail. I'm still figuring out what to do with it, which I think means I'm still figuring out what I want to do with that part of the story. That's allowed. Not everything has to be resolved cleanly to be resolved honestly. In April, I put in for a transfer to my firm's Nashville office, not because of Nathan, but because I'd spent a decade building a life in a city I'd moved to partly out of inertia, and something about standing in that house, in that yellow kitchen, had made me want to be less far away from things that were actually mine. I moved into the Ashford house on the 1st of May. The magnolia tree was blooming. I stood on the porch the morning I arrived with a cup of coffee and looked at it for a long time. The split down the center. The 2 trunks growing apart and then back toward each other. The whole thing still standing after everything it had been through. Stubborn wood, Grandma Ruth used to say. I thought about that, about what it takes to stay rooted when something tries to split you open, about the difference between surviving and being broken and surviving and being stronger at the broken place. I rehung the ceramic key hook in the kitchen. I kept the yellow curtains. I fixed the creaking floorboard in the upstairs hallway and then stood there for a minute, feeling like I'd made a small mistake, and then decided to leave the one next to it alone. Some things you keep because they tell you where you are. Opal came over for coffee that first Saturday. She brought a pie, which I told her she didn't have to do, and she told me she knew that and brought it anyway. We sat on the porch for 2 hours. The weather was exactly right. The magnolia tree threw shade across the yard in long, uneven patches, and neither of us felt the need to fill the silence with anything that wasn't already there. She would have liked this, Opal said at some point. I know, I said. The funny thing about coming home is that it never quite looks the way you remembered it. The rooms are different sizes. The distances are shorter. Things you thought were permanent have changed, and things you thought had changed are exactly as you left them. You walk through a place that holds your whole history, and you realize that history was always more complicated than the story you told yourself about it. But complicated isn't the same as broken, and broken isn't the same as gone. I'm still a structural engineer. I still spend my days figuring out how to make sure things hold. The difference now is that I'm doing it in a house that was built to last, on land that was meant to be mine, with a key that fits the lock the first time every time. Betrayal didn't end me. It brought me back to where I started, and it turns out that was exactly where I needed to be. If you've ever had to fight for something that was always rightfully yours, something someone tried to take before you even knew it was under threat, leave your story below. And if this one meant something to you, subscribe. There are more stories coming, and they're all true in the ways that matter. There's something I've been thinking about since the day I sat in that conference room and watched my brother's face go the color of old paper. People who take what isn't theirs rarely do it all at once. It starts small, a boundary quietly moved, a silence that goes unchallenged, a trust that gets stretched just a little further than it was meant to go. And then one day, the stretching stops feeling like risk. It starts feeling like permission. Nathan didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who would forge a dead woman's signature. He became that person slowly, through 100 smaller choices that nobody called out, including me. I kept the peace. I stayed small. I told myself that invisible wasn't the same as hurt. It took losing something I didn't even know I was about to lose to understand that silence isn't neutral. Silence is a vote. And for years, I had been voting for a version of my family that only existed in the story I needed to believe. That's not self-blame. That's just honesty. And I think honesty is where everything real has to start. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make don't stay contained to us. They move outward. Nathan's choices reached my grandmother in the last months of her life and made her afraid enough to quietly rebuild her will, to copy documents, to trust a neighbor with her secrets because she wasn't sure she could trust her own son. His choices reached Diane, who sat in that conference room and watched the man she married become a stranger in real time. His choices reached me in ways I'm still discovering, in the way I now check documents twice, in the way I pause before extending trust, in the small, permanent shift in how I understand the word family. And my choices reached forward too. The choice to fly home when something felt wrong. The choice to sit in that room and say nothing when Nathan looked to me for rescue. The choice to listen to his voicemail 3 times and still not call back. Not out of cruelty, but out of the hard-earned knowledge that forgiving someone and handing them back the same access are 2 entirely different things. Resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing which cracks to repair and which ones to leave as reminders. The magnolia tree in front of Grandma Ruth's house split down the center decades ago. Every reasonable person told her to cut it down. She didn't. And it grew back into itself. 2 trunks leaning toward each other, stronger at the split than anywhere else. I think about that tree a lot. I think about what it means to stay rooted when something tries to divide you, to grow through damage instead of pretending it didn't happen, to become, in the end, more yourself, not less, because of everything that tried to take you apart. The house is mine. The key fits the lock. The yellow curtains are still in the kitchen, and I am still standing.